Every single Republican in the Arizona State House just voted for a bill that would force students from kindergarten through high school to say the Pledge of Allegiance. There's no penalty specified for students who disobey, but this bill, this illegal, thoughtless bill, offers no exceptions for most students who don't want to participate in the religious ritual. Let me just put the facts out here first. House Bill 2523 says all K-12 students shall recite the Pledge of Allegiance to the United States flag. Shall, not may. They have to. The only exceptions apply to students who are at least 18 and legally an adult, or students who have the explicit permission of their parents to sit out. But those aren't really exceptions. They apply to a very narrow band of seniors in high school and students whose parents agree with their political and religious views. And if you're the sort of kid who has personal reasons for not wanting to stand for the pledge, odds are your parents and you don't see eye to eye. My Indian parents got mad when I got an A- in stuff. You think they would sign off on my desire to argue the country isn't perfect? So let's be honest and say this bill would force most kids to say the pledge against their will. This bill passed by a slim 31-29 vote. Again, with every Republican supporting it and every Democrat against it. Maybe you're wondering why this is a big deal. It's just a few words, it's not traumatizing, who cares, right? I've made an entire podcast series about the history of the Pledge of Allegiance, which you can listen to below. But just to go over the biggest concerns, here's why some students may not want to stand and say the pledge. The phrase "under God" pushes religion onto people who may not be religious. I don't want to say a prayer in school. I don't think we should be pretending we live in a nation under God because we're not. And the government shouldn't be forcing kids to align with some fictional Christian view of American history. Even without that phrase, though, the very notion of pledging allegiance to a flag violates other people's religious beliefs. Some of the first court battles involving the pledge were led by Jehovah's Witnesses who said it violated their religion to worship or pledge allegiance to anything that wasn't Jehovah or God. The pledge also falsely suggests that we have liberty and justice for all, which is one reason students of color have opposed it in recent years. They understand our nation's racist past and present. Oh, and the pledge was originally written to promote anti-immigrant sentiment. The socialist pastor who wrote it wanted to make sure all those foreigners coming into the US at the time were leaving their love for their home countries at the border. And hey, if we take Marjorie Taylor Greene seriously when she talks about the need for a national divorce, then we're not really indivisible either, are we? Finally, our country doesn't always deserve admiration. Sorry, why would we want to pledge allegiance to a nation that is so often a global embarrassment? If Saudi Arabia forced students to say a pledge to their country every day, we would immediately call it a form of brainwashing. So, those are all reasons not to say the pledge in a normal situation. But we're not having a philosophical debate right now. We are having a legal one. Forcing students to participate in a religious ritual against their will, unless their parents feel the same way they do, is undoubtedly a violation of students' civil rights. That means this bill is illegal and would provoke a lawsuit if it ever became law. In fact, the Supreme Court ruled in 1943 in a case called West Virginia State Board of Education versus Barnett, that students could not be forced to salute the flag or say the pledge. That decision actually overturned a notoriously awful ruling from 1940, which said the opposite. The Republicans in Arizona want to go back to 1940. And not just for this reason, I'm sure. While under God wasn't in the pledge at the time, The justices said in 1943 that the government could not compel speech. In fact, one justice famously wrote in that majority opinion, "If there is any fixed star in our constitutional constellation, it is that no official, high or petty, can prescribe what shall be orthodox in politics, nationalism, religion, or other matters of opinion, or force citizens to confess by word or act their faith therein." There is a reason that line is something every law student has heard before. It encapsulates an idea that is core to our identity as a nation. The government cannot force you to perform some mindless religious pseudo-patriotic ritual. None of that, however, mattered to the Arizona bill's sponsor, a first-term Republican state representative named Barbara Parker, who, in a speech just before the vote took place, implied that church-state separation itself was a myth.
It's really important that we clear up a few things that should never be said again from lawmakers in a legislature. One, the separation of church and state is in the Constitution. That was never said in the Constitution. It was written in a letter years later.
Separation of church and state emerges from the First Amendment and has repeatedly been interpreted that way by the courts. Even if the exact phrase isn't in there, the meaning is very clear. To pretend it's not there, and that the government can therefore promote religion in general, is nothing more than willful ignorance from someone who clearly has plenty to spare. Parker also said that the 1943 Supreme Court decision was irrelevant.
Everybody tends to quote the Barnett ruling from 1943. First of all, under God wasn't put in 1943. It was put in 1954, and nobody's really ever opposed that.
Parker is flat out wrong about the Barnett case. She cited it because a Democrat mentioned it just before she spoke, but Parker seemed to think the case was being used to push back against under God. No, it wasn't. It was cited to point out that the government cannot force students to say or do something political against their will. And yes, plenty of people and judges have opposed both mandatory recitation of the pledge and the inclusion of under God. This has been tested in the courts. Her side loses every time. Finally, she claimed that the pledge was fine, since her legislative colleagues say it every day.
Furthermore, we stand and say the Pledge of Allegiance every day on this floor. What's good for us is good for the children.
Again, she has no clue what she's talking about. Just to give one example, the Supreme Court has, foolishly, I think, permitted invocation prayers at city council meetings. But the same privilege does not extend to school board meetings or graduations where children may be present. Adults don't have to participate in those prayers, but we should not put the burden to leave the room or the football huddle on children who have a lot of pressure to conform. Just because Republicans in the Arizona legislature want to use their majority to inflict Christianity on their colleagues doesn't mean they have any right to force that on children. By the way, the Arizona Senate, where the bill now heads, also has a slim Republican majority of 16 to 14. But here's the silver lining to all this. Even if it passes there, Governor Katie Hobbs is a Democrat who can and almost certainly will, thankfully, veto it. If and when that happens, Hobbs would be saving Arizona taxpayers from a costly lawsuit they would inevitably lose. But even if this bill doesn't become a law, make no mistake about what Republicans are trying to do here. Rather than pass bills that help the poor or lift up marginalized communities or anything that would legitimately make people proud of their government, they're trying to force kids to say how much they love it. You know you've screwed up when the only way you can get kids to pledge loyalty to you is through force. If our country regularly gave people a reason to be proud of it, you wouldn't need a pledge. This bill is misguided on principle and illegal in practice. And that will not change no matter how much misinformation Christians like Barbara Parker want to spread.